Now, Southern Fun, that's our name for it. It's actually a Chow Fun. It's something that I grew up eating as a kid at least once a week. Whenever I go home and see the family, this is the first thing waiting for me at the dinner table. Hey guys, I'm Chef Eric Silverstein with the Peach Tortilla and Bar Peach in Austin, Texas, and today we're gonna be making Southern Fun. These are the ingredients we'll be working with today. I'm gonna kind of run through them real quick. We've got our bean sprouts and our kale. You're probably wondering, well, kale's not a typical Chinese ingredient. It's not. We've got some flank steak, some yellow onion, a little bit of ginger, and some garlic, some fresh rice noodles. You don't have to use fresh rice noodles. You can use a dried product, but if you can find the fresh product, highly recommend that. We also have some fried shallots, green onions, and some cilantro. Now we have some light soy and some sweet soy. The sweet soy has kind of like a molasses flavor. We have some oyster sauce, a little bit of chili garlic sauce, Shaoxing Chinese cooking wine. And then lastly, we have white pepper. Now we're gonna go ahead and make our marinade for the flank steak. I've got some oyster sauce to start. I'm gonna do about a tablespoon of oyster sauce in the bowl. I'm gonna add about a tablespoon of light soy, not to be confused with dark soy. I'm gonna do a touch of toasted sesame oil. This is just to add a little bit of that sesame flavor, some of that umaminess. I'm gonna do about a teaspoon in there. On top of that, I'm gonna do about a teaspoon of Shaoxing Chinese cooking wine. That might have been a little bit over. And then I'm gonna go ahead and add some of our dry ingredients. So I've got some white pepper. White pepper's got a little bit of heat to it. I like adding it in all my stir-fry dishes, especially in the marinades. I'm gonna add a little bit of sugar for sweetness, say about half a teaspoon. And then I'm gonna also add cornstarch. Cornstarch is mainly for texture. It should also help the marinade sort of adhere. And then I'm gonna add some baking soda. And the baking soda is really just to help tenderize the meat. And then I'm gonna go ahead and just give this a quick mix. As you can see, it's not a ton of marinade, and we're not looking to drown the meat in the marinade. It's really just meant to coat it and let it penetrate the meat. Now that we have our marinade done, we're gonna go ahead and move on to cutting the flank steak. With the flank steak, you know, it's a relatively flat cut of steak, and we're gonna cut against the grain. Now, I could see the grain runs from my left to my right. I'm gonna go against the grain, and I'm gonna cut it on a bias. And so I'm gonna come at it with a knife at a pretty significant angle. We're cutting the steak before we marinate it, mainly to increase the surface area so the marinade really penetrates that steak. If you want, I recommend putting it in the freezer for 10-15 minutes before you slice it. It's gonna make it a little bit easier to slice. We've got all our steak sliced nice and thin, and I'm just gonna add it into my marinade, and I'm gonna dress the steak lightly with that marinade. And it's gonna absorb it pretty quickly. You know, the marinade gets pretty thick because of that cornstarch. We're gonna go ahead and let that flank steak rest in that marinade, and while it's resting in the fridge, we're gonna go ahead and prepare the rest of the ingredients for our Southern Fun. All right, so now that we have our steak marinating in the fridge, we're gonna go ahead and prep the rest of the ingredients that make up the Southern Fun. We've got some ginger. I'm just gonna use the back of a spoon and try to get some of that skin off. We're gonna go ahead and just use a microplane and finely grate that ginger. I don't need a ton of ginger for this dish. I mean, we're looking at probably a couple teaspoons. So just gonna go ahead and set this ginger aside in a small bowl. So I've got a whole bulb of garlic. I'm gonna go ahead and take a couple cloves out. Honestly, depending on the size of your cloves, you may need a little bit more. Fat cloves like this, you really only need a couple. If you wanna go ahead and buy peeled garlic at the store, you're totally welcome to do that. I'm not gonna judge you for it. That garlic does have a little bit of a diluted flavor. I would frown on you if you use the minced garlic. That stuff pretty much just tastes like fake garlic. So now that we have the garlic sliced thinly, I'm just gonna rock my knife back and forth to go ahead and get that minced garlic. Probably not gonna use all that garlic. That's about 5 cloves. I don't need 5 cloves, but I'm gonna set that right there. Now next, we're gonna slice this onion. We're just basically gonna julienne it. It's just a yellow onion. It gets incorporated into the dish fairly early on. We're just gonna be sauteing it initially. We're gonna take that half an onion. We're just gonna go ahead and set that aside as well. We have our green onions. The green onions are going into the stir fry, but they're also gonna be used as a garnish on the dish. We're gonna go and aim for a really nice thin cut on these green onions, which means that you have to have a pretty sharp knife, and we're just gonna go nice and thin on these green onions. I'm gonna go ahead and set these green onions aside. Lastly, we're gonna cut our kale. Now we're using a Tuscan kale or a lacinato kale, and we're gonna go about 2/3 of the way down. You know, the stem starts to get a little bit bigger towards the bottom. It's gonna be a little bit more difficult to eat. And we're just gonna do a nice chiffonade on this guy. Kale obviously isn't traditional Chinese cooking ingredient. If you don't have kale at home, you could probably even get away using something like a Chinese broccoli, or even like a bok choy would probably honestly work. And that's gonna be plenty of kale for this dish. We have our cilantro, and the cilantro is just a garnish. So we're not gonna actually chop it or anything, we're just gonna pick it very loosely. You could pick this on the fly as you plate up, but as chefs and in the restaurant business, we try to get everything mise en place, ready for service, and so that's why we're gonna go ahead and do this right now. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and make our, what we call at the restaurant, our fun sauce. We're gonna start with oyster sauce. Primary ingredient in it is oyster extract. We're gonna add some sweet soy. Now, sweet soy, I feel like, is one of those ingredients that is just not as well known, but provides really good flavor to the dish. It's really unique. It doesn't taste anything like light soy. Next, we're gonna go ahead and add our light soy sauce. And then lastly, it's our chili garlic sauce, which is gonna give the dish some heat. I'm just gonna go ahead and whisk that together. And that's gonna be our fun sauce. All right, guys, so now that we have all our ingredients prepped up for this dish, we're gonna go ahead and execute the dish and fire it in a wok. So today we're gonna be using a carbon steel wok to try and control the heat as best as possible, but most of this is gonna be done on really high heat. And so we're gonna go ahead, fire up our wok, and start with a little bit of oil. I'm gonna use canola oil for this dish. I'm gonna wait for that wok to smoke a little bit, and at that point, I know the oil, the wok, both hot enough, and we're gonna go ahead and add the marinated steak to go ahead and cook. Because the wok is so hot, really shouldn't take long. I'm thinking maybe 30 seconds to a minute in the wok. I mean, for this steak, we're just making sure that we're basically looking for it to be slightly caramelized on the outside. Remember, we're adding it back into the stir fry, so it's gonna get cooked again. If you're worried about doneness, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Just make sure the outside's nice, caramelized and brown. Now, the reason why I went ahead and did the steak first is I wanna make sure we don't crowd the pan. I've let the wok come back to temp. I'm gonna add a little bit more oil. I'm gonna go ahead and add some onions, and then I'm gonna add my ginger and garlic. Go ahead, add some green onions as well, a touch more oil. Now I'm gonna go ahead and add the fresh rice noodles. I'm gonna add a little bit of our white pepper, and then I'm gonna add about half of our sauce. But I added it onto my spatula, and then I ladled it onto the pan directly. There's a school of thought in cooking with the wok that adds a completely different flavor to your dish. I think it's because of the reactive nature of how hot that wok is and it going directly in the pan. Okay, I just touched my noodles. I can tell that they're almost there. They're about 80% cooked. You basically want your noodles to be soft. If they're a little bit hard, then you know they haven't cooked all the way through. I'm gonna go ahead and add my bean sprouts. I'm just gonna take a handful, drop them in there. At this point, I'm gonna lower my wok heat too, because this dish is pretty much cooked. Then I'm gonna add some kale. Nice handful. All right, lastly, we're gonna add our steak back in. We'll go about another 15, 20 seconds, and then we're gonna cut the heat and plate. So now we're gonna go ahead and plate the Southern Fun. All right, so I got a nice big platter here, and I'm gonna lay those noodles just kind of at the bottom here. You can see how well those fresh noodles cooked in that wok. Kale adds a little bit of color. Bean sprouts, a little bit of texture. I'm gonna go ahead and garnish with some green onions to start. On top of that, some fried shallots. These fried shallots you could pick up at any grocery store. Pretty incredible flavor pop. And then lastly, we're gonna garnish with those sprigs of cilantro that we picked earlier. And that's our Southern Fun. Now, I'm gonna have to go ahead and give this thing a try. Absolutely delicious, just reminds me exactly how my mom made it. Every element really plays a role. The fresh rice noodles, the sauce is such an integral role. We've got some crunch from the fried shallots as a garnish, the kale for color. Everything works so well together, and of course, cooking it in a wok over that high heat, getting some of that wok flavor into the dish, and it came out fantastic. I'm Chef Eric Silverstein with the Peach Tortilla and Bar Peach in Austin, Texas. Thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time.